Welcome, investigator. Evil is on the rise. Crime is escalating. Our mission is to eliminate the crime by exposing evil, examine why it manifests, and highlight the brave souls that confront it every day. Join us as we work together to bring justice to every victim. Welcome to All Things Crime. Here's your host, Jared Bradley.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of All Things Crime. I'm Jared, your host. I'm excited to be here. Appreciate you listening and watching on YouTube and Rumble. And got a great guest today. But before I introduce him, I just want to let you know that this episode is sponsored by MVAC Systems. MVAC is the wet vacuum DNA collection system that you all are so familiar about. We've talked about multiple cases that it's helped solve. But basically, it sprays that solution down on the surface, vacuums up the DNA, and helps investigators solve cases that they may otherwise never be able to solve. So remember MVAC Systems. We have a YouTube channel as well as lots of cases that we've solved. So feel free to visit there. And if your agency doesn't have one, boy, let them know about it. All right. So let's get to today's guest, Neama Rahmani. I got that right, correct?
You got it, Jared. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, I appreciate you being patient with me and bringing you in. So, and you know, thanks so much for making a few minutes for us today.
Oh, I'm excited to be on. First time. I've heard a lot of great things about the show, so excited to be a first-time guest on.
All right. Awesome. Appreciate that. So your resume, honestly, is so long, I have to read it. So first of all, well, you know, and maybe what we ought to do, rather than just, you know, blasting out all of these crazy accolades you have, why don't we just talk a little bit about it? You know, one of my first questions for you, Rima, is you were admitted into UCLA at 16 and you graduated from Harvard Law School by the time you were 22. So that is so far away from what most kids are doing today. What is it that drove you to want to be, you know, to do that? I think that's so telling, is what kind of a man you are, that you would be so accomplished by the time you're 22 years old.
Well, Jared, I wish I had a good answer, but basically, I'm a super nerd. My grandfather was a judge. I knew I always wanted to be a judge. So I was going to go to law school, become a prosecutor. I skipped a couple grades when I was a little bit younger. So I was a couple years ahead, finished high school at 16, was able to finish college in 3 years at 19, went straight to law school. So, you know, I don't recommend that for anyone. You know, I got kids of my own. I want them to take their time, enjoy their school years. But, you know, I made the mistake of just plowing right through. And, you know, when I went to Harvard Law School, I got in at 18, started at 19. The average starting age was 27, 28. A lot of folks with advanced degrees, years of work experience. So probably wasn't where I needed to be socially and emotionally. I think I ended up catching up later, but that's my story. So folks ask me, you know, should I do the same thing? I say, just take your time. You're going to be working the rest of your life and make sure you're ready for that law school experience. Because sometimes people go to grad school or college and not necessarily what they want to do. They end up spending years of their life, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and have to start all over. So take your time is advice I'd like to give folks that are watching and listening.
Yeah. Well, my 18-year-old right now is she's in school and, you know, as a freshman, kind of floundering on what she really wants to do. She thinks she wants to be a nurse. And I keep telling her, you know what, you're 18. If you make a mistake and you need to start over and do something different, it's okay. You've got plenty of time. You know, it seems like we have two types of kids in today's society. One, you know, the ones that are really driven, that like you, that, you know, wanted to just fire off and they want to start, you know, get their career started and get making money. And then there's others that, man, it's like they're 32 and still living in their mom's basement. So, you know, a nice in between somewhere in there would be nice.
No, I agree, Jared. And what I recommend, like I said, talking to my own kids or, you know, students in high school or college, look, if you're thinking about law, you're thinking about medicine, whatever it is, go work for a firm, go work for a judge, go work for, you know, a prosecutor's office. Medicine, go work for a hospital, go work for a doctor, you know, spend a few months there. I mean, nothing's permanent. No one's getting married, but, you know, I have people coming here. We have 150 employees at our firm. We have interns coming in and out, and some people come here and they absolutely love it, and it sort of solidifies their career path. But other people come and they say, Neema, thank God I did this because I don't want to spend the rest of my life doing this. They might not be fighters. They might not like the adversarial nature of the law. They might not like, the criminal side of things or civil or whatever the case may be, but there's really no substitute for actually going because, we all know school is great, but it doesn't necessarily prepare you for the actual substance of doing whatever you're going to do after school.
Oh, absolutely. School, in my opinion, is just a bubble, and it doesn't really reflect real life. And so unless you have some kind of an internship or something that, get out there. Well, for example, I mean, most of the people I work with are on the investigative side, detectives and CSIs. And I heard about this girl that she went through 4 years got her forensics degree. On her first crime scene, was out there puking and, having a miserable time. And she's like, I'm done. So she wasted basically 4 years of her life and, had never even, talked to or gone out with a CSI. And so I highly recommend it. Anyway, kind of a tangent, but, fun to talk about. And another thing, I have to throw this in there, Neema, is it sounds like your wife is also an attorney, but she specializes in foster care kids.
No, that's right, Jared. And, she does God's work. So anytime there's an allegation of abuse, and, there are folks who are mandatory reporters. Oftentimes, it's a teacher or a doctor that makes the report to social services, and social workers come and they take that kid away from the parents. And there's a hearing. In California, it's called a dependency hearing, but, there's similar types of hearings in every single state. And at that hearing, it's one of the only times that the parents will get appointed counsel because it's such a fundamental right. What the state wants to do is take those children away. So there's essentially quasi prosecutors. They're trying to terminate those parental rights. The parents get appointed lawyers. My wife is the third set of lawyers. She's the court appointed attorney for the child. So she'll have kids that are 2 days old. They tested positive for drugs at the hospital. They've been taken away from parents. She has other kids that are older. Maybe they're in their teens and they've been subject to severe physical and sexual abuse. But she is their legal guardian, while they're working their way through the foster care system. So she'll have anywhere from 200 to 300 kids at a time. And I could tell you, I put more than 1,000 people in federal prison, but, dealing with abused kids was probably, one of the most challenging things that I've ever seen. So, God bless her and those folks that work in our juvenile system working with kids, because it's something that is very difficult and frankly, something that was hard for even me to do.
Oh, 100%. My wife and I are parents of 3 foster kids that we adopted after a year. And so that's near and dear to my heart. And I'll tell you that just seeing what they went through, my twins were 2.5 when we adopted them. And but the condition that they were in when we first got them that first night, in fact, those first few nights were just unreal, just miserable. So yeah, but it's been a hard road, but they're well adjusted now, and we've had them 10, 11 years. So yeah, I when I hear about stories like your wife, God bless her, she's doing God's work for sure.
Yeah, well, I got to tell you, and I'm sure you know this, it's really God bless you and your wife, because when you adopt a child from the foster care system, you are saving that child's life. I can't tell you, the statistics, you probably already know them, but, my wife will probably count on 1 or 2 hands the number of kids she has that even graduate high school. Kids that grow up in foster care, at least here in California, the statistics are horrifying. More than 50% of them, within 3 years of turning 18, more than 50% end up dead, trafficked, imprisoned, or homeless. They don't have a chance. So whenever they're adopted by a loving family like yours, you are truly saving that child's life. So I really tip my hat to you and your wife, not only adopting 1, but 3 children. That's amazing.
Yeah, there were 3 twins, and then the younger one's just only 16 months younger. So it was almost like getting triplets. So yeah, I went from a nice, serene life to just having 2 daughters that were almost self-sufficient to just complete chaos, man. Just these 3 little maniacs in the house, and it's a bit. You know what? I would never go back and do it differently. So
yeah, but you really changed the course of those children's lives. Obviously, your daughters are clearly older. You could have just sort of retired and, put your parenting days behind you, but you chose not to adopt one, but three. I mean, it really, anyone that's listening, anyone wants to make a difference in this world. I mean, that's really how you do so. Foster a child, adopt a child, get involved in the foster care system, because those kids, they really have no one to support them.
100%. Yeah. Most of this gray hair. Yeah. That's my boys right there. So, all right. Well, let's get back to you. You know what, man, Amy, where do I start? Let's see. So one of the main things that caught my eye about your resume was you became, you got out of law school, you went to work for a firm, and then after a little while, you became a federal prosecutor. So a couple of years doing that, correct?
Yeah. So I was a federal prosecutor for 3 years. I was a city prosecutor for a couple more years, and I loved being a prosecutor. Greatest job in the world. And the plan was, to kind of cut my teeth, get some trial experience, become a judge. And then we had some kids. We were 2 lawyers on a government salary here in LA. Financially, it was just tough. So one of us had to get a real job. And my wife said, leave the government. I go back to the private sector. So, and that one of us was me. I just said, I don't want to do defense work. I was working at a big firm, was doing, defending criminals, defending these big corporations. So, when I couldn't be a prosecutor, I said, well, let me represent victims, folks who've been sexually assaulted, they've lost a loved one, dealt with some employment issue at work, sexually harassed, wrongfully terminated. So I started doing civil plaintiffs work. Not as good as being a prosecutor, but at least you're on the right side and you're helping folks as to defending corporations and criminals. So I'm one of the few former federal prosecutors that doesn't do any criminal defense work. Makes it a little bit unique.
Oh, that's fantastic. So during your years as a federal prosecutor, what was maybe your favorite case? Out of all the cases that you did prosecute, which one are you the most proud of?
Probably the most proud of was Logan Quiroga. He was a murderer and fugitive kingpin. He was featured on America's Most Wanted. Spent a few years tracking him down in Mexico. Indicted about 7 or 8 people on the way there that were trafficking methamphetamine for him. But I would say probably the case I was most proud of, even though it really ended up not being a case, was a call I got one day. So I was prosecuting drug and human trafficking cases in San Diego along the U.S.-Mexico border. I got a call one day from one of my agents, actually one night from one of my agents. And he called me and he's like, Neama, I need you. The Border Patrol arrested someone and, she's a Persian speaker. She's frantic and we don't have a translator. So, I told my agent, I'm like, listen, my parents are Persian. I speak some Persian, but I was born here. I'm not fluent in any way. So I can try to help you out. But, if you want someone that is an actual certified translator or interpreter, I'm not your guy. He's like, no, we need anyone. So I talked to this woman who's in Border Patrol custody and, she's been apprehended. It's her husband and their child. And she is frantic. And she tells me this crazy story where her husband is a political dissident in Iran. He's a journalist. He's writing articles against the government. He's imprisoned there in Iran. Shortly after he's released, somehow they get a hold of traffickers in Iran that smuggle them to Europe. They work their way from Europe to Mexico. And then when they're in Mexico, coyotes agree to smuggle them through the hills and through the desert. Now, it's a mom and dad. They have a little bit of an older child, I think maybe 5 or 6 years old, and they have a young baby. And the traffickers say, listen, there's no way the baby, who's only a few months old, is going to be able to make it through the desert. So what we're going to do is we're going to smuggle you in, mom, dad, and the older child. And then someone's just going to walk the baby through the port, San Ysidro. So once mom and dad and the older child are arrested, the mom is freaking out. She doesn't know where her baby is. So, I get involved, even though, again, it's not a case that's been charged or anything. And, using basically the intelligence that we have, we put the word out that, look, where's this baby? And we find out that this drug trafficking organization is actually trying to sell the baby on the black market in Mexico. So I have a pretty good reputation as a pretty aggressive prosecutor. I tell my agents to tell all of our sources down in Mexico that if they harm this baby or they sell this baby, I will do everything in my power to make sure that I find the people responsible, indict them, and extradite them to the U.S. The next day, the baby is delivered and dropped off at the port of entry. So, we ended up saving this baby as a result of, my efforts. Again, it wasn't a case, wasn't anyone that was prosecuted. We ended up connecting the family with some immigration attorneys and processing their asylum application. But, it was a really good result and something that I'm proud of and I'll never forget.
Wow. That is awesome. With everything that's going on today and, the border that's going on now and all the trafficking, I don't know if you've been able to listen to any of my episodes in the past, but I've interviewed the executive producer of The Sound of Freedom, and just the awareness, I think, that the world is coming, just all the news that's coming from the border, and that human trafficking is just such a massive enterprise now. And it just, to me, all these crimes against the children is just sick. And it drives me crazy. As a dad, as a man, it just drives me absolutely crazy. So, at least we got a couple of good stories, and I appreciate you doing that and sharing that.
Yeah, and Jerry, this is something I'm very familiar with. At a law school, I was actually hired by a guy named Ali Mayorkas. He was Clinton's U.S. attorney. He's obviously Biden's head of DHS. He's under fire right now. I was on the front lines of the border. I was hired under a Bush administration U.S. attorney, and I worked under an Obama U.S. attorney. And I wish I had an answer for you from a public policy or criminal justice perspective. Even probably on my best day as a drug prosecutor, maybe I was getting 10% of what was coming in. I don't know what the answer is. I wish I did. Some of it obviously is going to be prosecution. Some of it's going to be immigration. Some of it's going to be education, but it's very challenging to work that job because no matter what, no matter who is in charge, it really seems like a war that can't be won. And I'm not trying to get political, but it's tough, especially on the drug side. Whenever we would get someone pretty high ranking in the cartel, your target, you're working on getting this guy for months, sometimes years. You get the head of the snake. All of a sudden, 4 or 5 people come in and replace him, right? And in fact, it becomes even more violent because one group had control over a certain region in Mexico or a certain part of the drug trade. Now everyone's trying to fill that gap. So again, I don't know what can be done, but it can be very frustrating to be on the other side prosecuting these cases because look, you certainly can't legalize, especially, for instance, I was doing methamphetamine primarily. I mean, it's such a huge, this isn't, marijuana or, even folks that are for decriminalization. I don't think anyone supports decriminalization of very hardcore drugs like heroin and marijuana and look at the fentanyl crisis right now. So it's a public health issue and it's hard. It's really challenging to be on that side.
Oh, yeah. I don't know. I agree with you, Neama, that I don't think there's an answer to it, and we'll never get rid of 100% of it because there's always going to be people that want that. And,
Sure.
and that's human nature that it's depraved. And, there's always going to be, the types that want that. They want drugs. They want they have an attraction to children. There's always going to be people like that. And as long as there's always going to be somebody that fills that demand. And so I agree with you that there's no way to completely shut it off, but I think the more we educate the population that this problem exists and bring it more to light, and frankly, and share even stories like what you just did, that there are people out there that are fighting it, and as long as the majority of people are battling that and not accepting it, then I think at least it has a chance to save some of the kids. And that's it's a tough one because it's even when you talk to detectives that work in sex crimes, I to me, and I've said this over and over, and maybe I get your opinion on it. I think crimes against children are actually more damaging to society as a whole than even murder. Because number one, the child usually survives it. But the problem is they're so damaged from that abuse that it reverberates. It's almost like throwing a large stone into a pond. Those ripples go out forever. And it's like generational. So you're creating problems, not just for that person, but for that family and generations to come. And to me, it's like we spend so much time and resources and effort to solve homicides, and yet the sex trafficking and the sex crimes folks, they almost get overlooked.
Yeah, it's challenging, I mean, stepping aside from the drugs, which are sort of a whack-a-mole situation, the crimes involving children, I mean, they're so hard to the prosecutor. And look, I prosecuted sexual assault, sexual abuse cases. I represented victims, and they are amongst the most underreported crime, right? You have the kind of psychology of an abused victim, and and no one's blaming the victims, but I could tell you that for years there has been hesitation on the part of prosecutors to take on these tough cases, right? Prosecutors, they do not like to lose. They're expected to win every case, right? And frankly, a murder case is a lot easier to win than a sex abuse case when there might not be a contemporaneous report. The victim might have denied it for years or not told anyone, right? It's not like a murder case where someone's missing and you got all this evidence and folks want the person convicted, right? Oftentimes it's a he said, or he said, she said type situation. And the cases are challenging. There's not a lot of evidence. I think things have shifted a little bit with some of the Me Too and some of the laws, evidentiary. There's some evidence laws that have changed that have in sex abuse cases that allows more evidence to come in against these perpetrators. We're seeing the statute of limitations open as well. So I've seen a shift in the past 10 years or so. But, if you look at the percentage of sex abuse victims versus compared to the number of convictions, you're talking about less than 10%. And like you said, there's not just the criminal justice part of it. There's a whole cycle of abuse, right? People who are abused, they're much more likely to abuse others. And my wife's been doing this long. I don't want to age her, but now it's reached the point where she has kids that she represented as victims of physical and sexual abuse. And then they're having kids of their own that are being abused. So all of a sudden she's like, look, my client that went from being a victim all of a sudden is now an accused. So there's a whole conflict. Another lawyer has to come on. So she's been doing it long enough, but you're absolutely right. It ends up perpetuating that cycle of abuse. And, hopefully with education and empowerment, we can see the tide shifting a little bit.
Yeah. Well, people have to realize that, kids in general, it's not just their kids that they have to be protective of. They need to be protective of all kids, and any kind of abuse of kids just sends me over the edge. I can't handle it. I mean, yeah. Lord help anybody that, abuses a kid like that in front of me, because one of us is going to jail. So.
No, I agree. There's a special place in hell for those types of perpetrators. So, and hopefully, like I said, prosecutors take on the difficult cases and they believe the kids and they believe the victim.
So is there a burnout for prosecutors in those type of cases? I know that like the sex crimes detectives, it's usually 2 or 3 years and they just can't do it anymore.
It's hard. I could tell you that when I was a prosecutor, I hated those cases, especially when you have to see it. You're talking about the child pornography, the production of child pornography. I mean, it is the worst. You got to look at these horrifying images and videos of the abuse. And once that's out there, I mean, that like perpetuates the abuse of the victims forever. It's just out in the internet and all these sick people are watching it. So, I hated it. I tried to avoid those cases, even though there were righteous cases, especially once I had kids, it just fundamentally bothered me. That's why, when I say my wife's doing God's work, it's just, there's a lot of folks that don't want to see it. I mean, she's had kids where, their own parents have, one of them cut off the kid's ear. She had an infant that had so many cigarette burns on its body. My wife stopped counting at 100. I mean, just a horrible, and there's so many documentaries out there. I don't want to take this, in the podcast in a very dark direction, but, you just watch the news or you just, turn on your TV and watch a documentary, and there's so many stories of this horrific abuse. So you're right. There is a burnout rate. It's very hard to handle, sex crimes cases involving adults. You can imagine having to do it when you're dealing with child victims.
Oh, yeah. Well, I don't know why, but, it just seems that there's been a string of guests lately that in different capacities. One of them, Jimmy Toro, I think is his name. Sorry, one of my favorite guests, but I interviewed him several months ago, and he was at 4 years old. His own father and some of his friends actually was abusing him and actually buried him.
Oh my God.
Put him in a casket with a dead body and buried him. And, he almost died just trying to get out of there. And, but amazingly, he actually wrote a book and has gone through years and years of therapy. I think he's in his 50s or 60s now. But he's overcome it. And but it's taken him that long to overcome it. So there is resources and lots of people out there that have overcome it. But geez, how you could do something like that to your own kid is just, I just can't comprehend it. I mean, humans do amazingly abusive and just evil things to other humans, stuff that you would never do to an animal. And yet, I don't know, it's somehow they and a lot of them are just walking amongst the population. It's like you would never know, who is that guy, the Long Island serial killer?
Oh yeah, Rex Heuermann, right?
Guy in New York that, how many, possibly up to 10 victims, yet he was running an architect business and, just fairly normal guy, wife and kids. And then it turned out he's murdered multiple people. So
yeah, I mean, Rex Heuermann living a completely sort of alternate existence, right? I mean, reportedly his wife's out of town. He engages these sex workers. He taunts some of them and calls their family, as he's killing them. And, obviously his victims in New York, they're looking into South Carolina. He's got a home there, spent some time in Vegas, Atlantic City. It might just be really scratching the surface here. Someone had over 300 weapons and, sleeping in bed next to his wife, just kind of walking amongst us. So, you don't see a whole lot of serial killers nowadays. I think law enforcement has an advantage, that they didn't have in the 70s and 80s when it was kind of the heyday of this stuff, the changes in technology and obviously DNA, video, cell phone evidence. But here's someone who went years, and some of it's an indictment of the sheriff's department. They're their own scandals when they were investigating this case. But yeah, I mean, really sad. And it is those types of victims that tend to be preyed upon, right? If one of us goes missing, if I'm gone even an hour, I'm sure my wife's going to be, contacted law. My kids will, have an Amber Alert. But when sex workers go missing, I think unfortunately it's a little bit different, and that's why he was able to elude capture for so long.
Yeah, and there's some other, he thinks he's doing God's work by getting rid of prostitutes or something like that, and it's, yeah, some people get just really demented thoughts in their heads, and then they ponder on them so long, and then eventually they act on them, and just weird stuff. Well, hey, let's get back to you a little bit. So what was the time that you spent with the city of Los Angeles as a ethics guy? Describe that a little bit.
Yeah, so LA had a reputation for having some corruption problems in the 80s and 90s. And the city created two separate commissions. They created a police commission to oversee LAPD. This is after Rodney King and Rampart and some of that. And they created an ethics commission, which is to oversee all the elected officials in the city of LA and the high level employees. So, I was brought in to run the enforcement division. So I was the head prosecutor. So, I would oversee the election, oversaw Gruel versus Garcetti, and deal with any ethical issues. So government ethics laws, campaign finance, election. I was basically the watchdog for the city of LA. And I took the position because it was a prosecution type position, but it was also quasi-political, and it was really a stepping stone to be a judge. And that was the plan. So, I was doing narcotics, and, my daughter was born in San Diego. My wife said, we're doing narcotics. We're doing cartel prosecutions. Probably not the safest job when you just had a kid. At the time, there was like $1 million bounty on AUSAs and DEA agents, during some of the heyday of the cartel violence. So, I kind of took a step back, came back to LA where my wife's family's from. My son was born back to back, a little over a year apart. Started doing public corruption and was being vetted for the bench by the California governor at the time. And that's when, we looked at our finances and realized we're spending more on childcare than we were making. And we had to sort of make a decision. But I love the job, fun job, because you were really sort of digging into some of the underbelly of politics. And I mean, we're seeing at a pretty high level now with the federal government and all the allegations of corruption on both sides. But even at the local level, a city like LA, it was pretty bad. And recently, since I left, you've had 3 council members that have been under indictment in the city of LA, prosecuted by the feds, doing federal prison time. So pretty fun job. And also you're dealing with the dirtiness of politics, unfortunately.
I don't think a lot of people understand how big of a budget a city like Los Angeles has. I mean, you're talking billions and billions of dollars. And I'll give you a little example of some of the things that I've experienced. We were doing some business with South Africa, and we actually had a big contract all lined up. And my distributor over there calls me up and he said, "Hey, I got some bad news, man." He said, "Everybody from the head of the South Africa police services and about 3 levels down have all been fired. Most of them are in jail because of just the corruption." And, you get a lot of these people that they work their way up from, various jobs, but a lot of them come from poor communities. And all of a sudden they're in charge of some multi-million-dollar budget, and different vendors will come in. And this is exactly what happened with South Africa. I mean, some of those guys literally grew up in little concrete brick homes with dirt floors. And then the apartheid happened. And so all of a sudden they're in charge of millions and millions of dollars. And some vendor comes in and says, "Hey, give me the business and we'll give you this." And it's, it's your typical corruption case. And next thing you know, they're getting slipped, envelopes of money and under the table. But that money has to get tracked somewhere. You can't just all of a sudden show up with a Mercedes Benz and somebody goes, "Oh, wow, you're doing that on a government salary." And, it's hard. It's easy to understand, actually. But at the same time, you expect that, your government officials to not have that corruption, but it's so widespread.
It is. And, we talked about drugs, right? And, someone has an opportunity to make 5 or 10 times as much money, or participating in the drug trade. We see it a lot in college sports, for instance, right? You got kids out of school, they're making millions of dollars for their universities, and just the economics make sense to pay them. It's not right. Now, obviously, some of that's changed with the NIL and recently, but then you're looking at government officials, right? They're responsible for, multi-billion-dollar budgets, and they're giving out contracts, right? Sometimes they do these no-bid contracts, or, again, not saying it's right, but you kind of look at the economics, and there's a reason why people try to bribe them, and they accept bribes because the deals are worth that much. Or in a city like LA, where the entitlements and permits and real estate is so valuable, right? You get approval to build a big development. That's worth a lot of money as a real estate developer. That's why you just see so much of this corruption on the real estate side, because people are trying to get permits. People are trying to get things expedited to move things along, to grease the wheels. Again, not an excuse at all. It's a crime. It should be prosecuted. But I mean, that's why you see so much on it when you have this really sort of disparity in economics and all these different situations. It ends up being a big problem.
Yeah, I don't know if you're a fan of that I think it's on Netflix, the Lincoln Lawyer series.
I've watched it. Yes, it's very good. It's very well made. I've actually done some commentary on it. It's interesting because you could tell that they have really good legal analysts and writers in the show because they're really kind of getting into the substance of some of the California criminal law. So I think it's a very well made show on Netflix. I like.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed that 2 seasons, I think, but especially that second season. They're talking about all that real estate and the battle between the restaurant owner and the big developer and kind of that whole thing. It was pretty interesting. So a little plug there for Lincoln Lawyer and Netflix.
But yeah, definitely check it out. It's good, folks.
Yeah. Well, as a former military guy, I can definitely tell the shows that have really good military advisors and the ones that don't. And you can just look at uniforms and go, oh man, whoever their advisor is just dropping the ball there. So, well, you have one of the things I wanted to ask you. So, have you ever heard of the CSI effect?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I do live trial commentary.
Okay.
I'm one of the few former prosecutors that doesn't do defense work. So, networks will bring me in when they're covering live trials as their play-by-play guy. So
okay.
I'll do it most days. They'll run the trial. The witnesses are taking the stand. So jury selection to opening statements. So yeah, I know it very well. Jurors expect to see that forensic evidence. So if you don't have, the forensic expert or the pathologist or, they expect to see that. So kind of no body cases or cases without ballistic experts or the jurors are kind of sitting there, scratching their heads. They expect to see that type of evidence, and CSI, I think, is a big reason for that.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, but the particular way that it's been described to me by a lot of CSIs and detectives in today's, especially the courts, is the show CSI when it came about. It kind of warped a lot of the people in the community where they'll look at certain cases and they'll be like, hey, why isn't this thing solved yet? This trial's been going, or this investigation's been going for years. Why does it take so long? And so they have to re-educate the jury on really what it actually takes to solve a crime, and including the investigation and developing all of the evidence so that not only are they actually showing that the suspect is guilty, but also that it's rock solid. It's not, there's no real cases. And the CSI effect, I think, is kind of the, cases can't be solved in 43 minutes like what they show on TV. So is there something similar to that on the lawyer side?
It is. So, when I was a prosecutor, I would tell folks, it's not what I know, it's what I can prove, right? I want to bring a case. I want it to be bulletproof. I want it to be ironclad. I want to get 12 out of 12 beyond a reasonable doubt, and I want them to deliberate for an hour or two. When you come with that overwhelming evidence, one, you make sure that you're not ever prosecuting an innocent person. That's your nightmare if you're a DA or U.S. attorney, right? But, more than that, you present that overwhelming evidence of guilt, and guess what you get? You get a pretty quick guilty plea. You save a lot of time and you put someone away. You can kind of move on to the next case. So, on one hand, I get it. People expect crimes to be solved right away. But also, we talked about Rex Heuermann, right? Here's someone with 7 burner phones, right? You talk about Brian Koberger, right? People are a lot more sophisticated now, They're not taking their cell phone to the scene of the murder, right? He reportedly left it someplace else or turned it off or put it in airplane mode. So, on one hand, law enforcement has these advances in technology, but a lot of folks now are careful what they search up on their phone because they know that internet search history is there forever, who they call or who they text. So, as law enforcement kind of gets the advantage, I like to bring up OJ, right? The OJ jurors, they didn't believe in DNA evidence, but now no one disputes it. So folks are a lot more careful. Someone like Brian Koberger reportedly wore gloves everywhere he went, even though it was one of the most gruesome crime scenes in recent memory. 4 people stabbed in a home where you expect there to be DNA everywhere. There's only a single source of DNA at that scene. And there's a lot of other folks' DNA. So, people are becoming a lot more sophisticated, even on the criminal side, which makes it not necessarily as easy to gather evidence as folks would think.
Oh yeah. Well, I've known of cases where a serial rapist was wearing multiple layers of clothing and gloves and everything else, to try to, not leave his DNA. But eventually, especially I'm more on the DNA side, obviously. And when you're sloughing off 400,000 cells a day, eventually we're going to catch you. So that's the good news. But, and frankly, I can't imagine anything, committing any crime in multiple layers of clothing and a mask and 2 layers of gloves and all that, trying to rumble around is going to be actually any fun anyway. So
yeah, but we're seeing a lot more. I mean, just bringing up another case, multiple layers of clothing. I mean, Alex Murdaugh, right? Huge case, convicted of killing his wife and kid there in South Carolina. One of the things the defense argued is, look, there's no blood splatter, right? You kill someone close range with a shotgun, with a rifle. Why is there no blood splatter on the clothes? So again, like you said, changes of clothing and those types of things are what we're seeing now from some of these folks.
Yeah. The criminals are getting smarter, but that's why we're constantly developing technology to counterbalance that. So here's another question for you. As an attorney, it just seems to me like there are so many plea deals. Why is that? And how has that come to be over the years? It just seems that there's cases that you wonder why people aren't being arrested and actually prosecuted, and then you learn they get a plea deal, and it's so. Explain that process.
Yeah, so I can tell you that I'm a fan of more prosecutions. I'm a former prosecutor, so you're not talking to a criminal defense lawyer. I think the people that commit crimes should be prosecuted, and they should be prosecuted aggressively. When it comes to plea deals, a lot of it is frankly an issue of resources. Judges, they don't have time or the resources to try every case. Same thing with prosecutors. Sometimes they have dozens, maybe more than 100 cases that they have to deal with. And if you can't move your files, then you're going to get bogged down and things are going to pile up, and you're going to be stuck in a situation where you're not getting the convictions that you need. The system isn't set up for every case to go to trial. Even on the civil side, when I'm representing victims, I can tell you that on the civil side, 98% of cases, they settle. Trials are expensive and they take time. They take money. Jurors don't want to be there. Most of them. Most people don't get that, summons for jury duty and they jump out of their seat and they want to do it. So, obviously I would like to do it. I'm sure you'd like to do it because of your background, but most folks don't. So, that being said, I think sometimes, some deals are given that shouldn't be given. I don't like to give significant discounts, especially if someone's going to step up to the plate and accept responsibility and present some sort of mitigation package and try to get their life back on track. That's one thing. But, if they're going to deny responsibility, lie about it, perjure themselves, lie to the jury, try to mislead the judge, for that, everyone has a constitutional right to a jury trial. I accept that, but I don't think that person should be getting any type of deal. The other big reason deals are given is, frankly, you need to cooperate, right? So if I'm prosecuting the head of the cartel, that guy is going to go nowhere near the drugs, right? He's going to pick up the phone and he's going to call his lieutenant and the product's going to move. So I got to flip people, kind of peel back those layers of the onion till I get to the guy that's the target of my investigation. So sometimes the deals are out of necessity because I need cooperation, not necessarily because I'm busy and I can't try all the cases.
Yeah. Well, it just, the layperson like me, I'm out here and I'm just like, that guy just seemed to like he got off easy, on occasion, especially when you go back to what we were talking about originally with, child sex traffickers and people like that. You're just like, the people like that shouldn't ever get a plea deal. But like you said, if you can flip them and then get to somebody that's higher up and maybe bring down the whole cartel, then, that's, that certainly makes sense. But I don't know, maybe, you need a better PR guy. That's, that would help with, making things a little more, acceptable to the public.
What I like, each state is different, but, in California, for instance, for these violent sex crimes, right? Rape, sexual abuse, and that, the judges have to run the sentences consecutively. When he's back to back, you can't get any concurrent time. And so we saw someone like Danny Masterson, a Hollywood actor recently, was convicted of raping 2 women. He got 30 years because the judge didn't have any discretion to give him anything less. It's a 15-year minimum. 2 victims, you're getting 30 years in prison. So that's what I like to see for those types of crimes of violence, sex crimes. You really shouldn't be getting concurrent time.
Oh, absolutely. So as a prosecutor, is there any particular case that, well, you know what, we already talked about the kingpin, but in your current practice, you've also, and the name of you started a practice after you left the city, and, you have a bunch of lawyers working for you now. What's some of the big cases you've worked there?
Yeah, so right now we've handled a lot of cases, involving folks who have died, suffered catastrophic injuries. We're in Hollywood, so we end up dealing with a lot of celebrities. We've sued a lot of celebrities for, we're representing the Lizzo plaintiffs right now. We're representing the folks who have sued Kanye West, or who's now known as Ye. So we end up, just because of the nature of where we are and what we do, we end up getting a lot of those Hollywood type cases. But, we'll see all types, we'll see officer involved shootings. We'll see, abuse victims. I represent women, lots of them who have been raped or sexually abused. So just really sad stuff. Unfortunately, when you're a practicing lawyer, usually you're in the business of misery. No one's calling you with good news. Doesn't matter what type of lawyer you are. For us, something bad has happened. But most lawyers, someone's getting divorced or someone's been arrested. Just bad. So, unfortunately, all we can do is try to kind of put the pieces together, make things right. But I think all of them would say, hey, I give every dollar back, or I don't care even if the person is in prison. I just wish this didn't happen to me. And so a lot of what we do is try to get them justice, but things will never be, the way they were before the horrific incident happened.
Yeah, of course. So I read that you represented Johnny Manziel. What was that? What was that about?
Yeah. So Johnny Manziel, he was married to a friend of mine. She's an actress. She's now on Selling Sunset. And that's one of the few defense cases I took. He, was sued by his landlord for some damage to his house. So that was a case I handled as a favor to him. This is when he was kind of transitioning off from the NFL and trying to get his life back in order. I mean, he was actually also the subject of a recent documentary that kind of discussed his, alcohol and substance abuse issues and kind of hitting rock bottom. But so, we helped him out in that case, just resolved it. But that's probably one of the last defense cases I took. And it was really as a favor to his wife at the time.
Yeah, I think his story is just one of the most tragic. And personally, I think he is a good example of why industry itself needs to be careful on giving too much success too fast, because I just don't think he was ready for it. He was only a freshman when he won his Heisman, and I think it destroyed him. And
yeah, I agree. We talked about I was too young for Harvard Law School. You're talking about the first ever redshirt freshman to win the Heisman Trophy, right? So, all the money he got, all the fame, at a really young age. You talk about your daughter. Imagine, everywhere she goes, right? You got Sports Illustrated, ESPN, and you're drafted in the first round of the NFL. And some of it is kind of the hangers on and the entourage and folks that aren't necessarily a good influence. But I mean, I'm a big college football fan, and any football fan will tell you the average life for an NFL player is just a few years. It's a very hard profession to be in. Yeah. And here's someone who had a lot of success. He was Mr. Texas, right? He committed to Oregon, then went to A&M, and he beat Alabama, wins the Heisman Trophy, and all of a sudden he's kind of put in this position where he's surrounded by people that really don't have his best interest in mind. And I think he'll say this, I love Johnny, and I still consider him a friend and a former client, but I don't think, he was ready for all that in terms of the success and the money and everything that kind of came along with it.
Oh yeah. Well, I don't think most kids that are 25 and younger aren't ready for any kind of real, massive success like he. I mean, what was his first contract, like $40 million or something? You you hand that kind of money to an 18-year-old, and I'll bet 99.9% of them just cannot fathom it. They think that the money is never going to end. It doesn't matter how much they spend, doesn't matter what they do. They can't do anything wrong. They can't overspend. And it's just a mentality, I think, that they get into, and it just destroys them. And it's sad to see it.
Yeah, it is. And, what I tell folks that, I have friends, I have relatives that, have success in professional sports. And I always say, listen, I'm like, maybe because I'm in my 40s now, you're not going to be young forever. You're not going to play. We got to think about life after football. Like, what's the plan? And, I think Johnny would have been a great coach. I know it's hard for him to kind of give up his football career, but, whether it's, broadcasting or coaching, if you want to kind of stay in the game, let's have a plan, because it's very hard. The Tom Brady's and people that are playing into their 40s, those are very few and far between. I mean, those are the unicorns out there. Most folks, by the time they're in their mid 30s, I mean, it's time to hang it up.
No, absolutely. I personally, I think Shaquille O'Neal is probably, out of all the athletes that I've ever seen, he's handled it the best. But,
yeah, no,
he's had some a lot of success stories out there. I was really good friends with Chad Lewis, that played for the Eagles, and BYU guy, and just absolute amazing guy. And he talked about a lot of that. He said the locker rooms were just an interesting place to be, and but he brought a maturity to the locker room that the coaches really appreciated. And I think the veterans, those kind of guys, and in this, I mean, there's a reason that senior partners aren't 2 years out of law school.
Sure.
It's, you guys have to bring these young guys into the fold and kind of teach them the ways and tell them to slow down. You're not going to be, trying the O.J. Simpson trials, right out of law school. You need to learn the trade. You need to learn how to do things. And if you get too big too fast, man, it's a long way to fall.
Oh yeah. I mean, look, I've been doing this more than 20 years right now, and I can't even imagine, handling these types of cases, as a first, second, third year attorney. But that's what these athletes, are tasked with doing. And it's really a recipe for failure. Again, unless they get those advisors, financial, legal, you get your systems in place. I think, some of these professional sports organizations, these leagues, are doing a lot better trying to educate them. But, I remember, I went to Houston to visit a buddy of mine, and he's a successful lawyer, and he happened to live in the same building as Vince Young. And Vince was not, just said hi to him. It's not like a friend or anything, but, it was a very nice building in Houston, probably one of the nicest ones. And then, a few years later, I'm watching like ESPN 30 for 30, and it's broke, and it's on Vince Young. I'm like, how did, someone I saw just a few years before end up on a Netflix documentary broke? I mean, here's someone that won a national championship, again, first round draft pick, NFL starting quarterback. And it just, in a matter of years, it was all gone.
Yeah. Well, how did Mike Tyson blow through $300 million?
Yeah.
Just, I can't fathom how he did it, but he did. So, that's some serious spending there. So,
yeah, it's like it's like those lottery winners, by the way. Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, I mean, same thing. They get all this money, and a lot of them just end up, just spending it all because they've never been used to managing it like that. So.
Yeah, 100%. So, last thing, your book, Harvard #. Tell me a little bit about that, and what inspired you to, and how did you find the time to write a book?
So I was doing Nancy Grace's show during the pandemic, and I think we were either talking about Derek Chauvin and George Floyd or Kyle Rittenhouse. It was a longer case, a more controversial case. So, there were multiple segments. So we went to a commercial. I was just talking to Nancy. I've been on her show several times, and she's like, you know what, Neama? And she has her, her Southern accent. You know what, Neama? You're representing these big companies. You're a prosecutor for years. Now you have your own firm. You've done all this. You've done so many different things. Like, you should write a book. And I'm like, you know what? I will write a book. So it was during the pandemic. We were shut down. We're working from home. We were in California for a year and a half. So, I write basically like a chapter a week on all sorts of different kind of topics, things, war stories, things that were interesting, because I went to Harvard Law School. I kind of had this path, And now we're one of the big firms on social media, right? I'm doing this true crime commentary. So we're doing TikToks, Instagram reels, some unique things. So I just kind of talked a little bit about my transition from, big law to prosecution, setting aside my dreams of taking the bench to, kind of pursue financial security for my family, starting my own firm and doing some of the social media. So I got to say Nancy Grace was the inspiration for that.
Oh, that's awesome. In fact, in preparing for that, I saw that you wrote that book. I was like, oh, I bet that is interesting. And so I jumped on Amazon and ordered it. So,
yeah, hopefully you liked it.
Harvard hashtag. Everybody jump on Amazon and go order that book. I'm sure it's going to be. I can't wait to read it. I just finished a book called In My DNA. It's a good friend of mine is a detective for a lot of years up in Tacoma, and she wrote that book In My DNA, and it was really good. So
I'll check it out. And just one thing about the book, Jared, just kind of close the loop. Every dollar, all the proceeds from that book go to foster kids. So it's not a moneymaker, donating every dollar to the kids that really need it. So thanks for your support. It's going to a good cause.
Awesome. Well, that's all the more reason. Anybody that supports a foster care program, that's a good reason to go buy that book. So, all right, Neama, any last advice for those of us that want to avoid guys like you?
No, listen to the podcast. Jared, you got a great one. Thank you so much for having me. Again, I just want to really give credit to you for building something so successful, but more importantly, what you've done in your personal life. Really, if anyone's listening, you want to make a difference in this world, think about fostering, volunteer with children. They desperately, desperately need it. It can change a life. So,
yeah, well, I can't think of a better way to end this episode on that. So, Neama, I appreciate you coming on, and fantastic. Anybody that needs a really good lawyer down in the LA area, I'll give you a call.
Thanks so much, Jared. Hope to be on again soon.
Oh, my pleasure. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us. Your attention today brings us one step closer to exposing and eliminating the evil that brings crime to our communities. Hit subscribe and share this episode. Together, we will bring justice to every victim.